Hi, folks. Before we move into some wave-based applications and experiments, I wanted to discuss the concept of interpenetration, as well as talk about how consciousness can move between wave-based dimensions, because we didn't discuss that before, and I feel like that's important. So let's talk about interpenetration, and we'll use an analogy again. Imagine a large jar, which that can represent the planet Earth. And beside that jar, you have large rocks, small rocks, pebbles, and sand. And these represent the different dimensions. And the large rocks represent the physical dimension. You put those in the jar first. So it looks like the jar is full, but it's not. There's space between the rocks, the large rocks. So you put the small rocks in and shake the jar around and let them settle. And there's still space. So you pour in the pebbles and shake the jar again so that the pebbles settle down, but yet there's still even more space. So you pour in the sand until it comes up to the top of the jar. And together, the large rocks, the small rocks, the pebbles, and the sand fill up the jar. And that's the same way these multiple dimensions, it coexist in the same space with the physical dimension, just like you have different FM radio stations coexisting in the same airspace together with Wi-Fi networks, with other radio stations, with TV networks. They all coexist in the same frequency range, but these dimensions can also coexist as well. Now, from a consciousness standpoint, let me put up the screen again that we had before. Excuse me. You remember I said you had the physical body, but you also had these other bodies that existed in higher dimensions. And I wanted to explain that principle. This is how your consciousness can move from a higher wave-based dimension to a lower dimension, is it has to move through these different bodies. And let me explain that now with another analogy. Imagine that you have floating in space in front of you a cube, a square, a line, and a period or dot. This cube can be turned in space to where it looks like a square, but a square can't be turned to look like a cube. Similarly, the square can be turned to look like a line in space, but a line can never look like a cube, and a line can be turned to look like a dot, but a dot can never look like a line. So what this shows you is that higher dimensional objects can move into a lower dimension, but lower dimensional objects can't move into a higher one. The same would be true for a movie versus a photograph. A movie can be stopped to where a single image will look like a photograph, but a photograph can never look like a movie. Same principle. But going back to our consciousness discussion, we have consciousness in a higher dimension, actually in the upper mental dimension, and it will move down through the different dimensions into different bodies. We actually have a version of our physical body in these higher dimensions, but our consciousness will move down into the mental dimension, the astral dimension, into the etheric, and into our physical body using that same principle. And that, I hope, will give you an idea of how to read these 4 books about the non-physical bodies, the etheric, astral, mental, and causal bodies, that were written by Arthur Powell. Now, let's go on to the next podcast, and we'll talk about examples of wave-based physics and applications, and I'll give you some experiments that you can try. Take care.